ready to build resiliency, create a healthy lifestyle, and overcome adversity with a warrior mindset. This is Define the Fight with Mariah Prussia.
Hey everyone, welcome to Define the Fight. We are back on this Monday morning, and we talk about BAs every once in a while, and I've had Navy SEALs on the show. I've had individuals who have broken world records, and now I am bringing today an amazing female who is clearly challenging herself in all realms from cold to heat. Rachel Utecht is a lifestyle endurance athlete. She works full-time, co-owns 2 businesses, and runs ultra marathons in her spare time. So her passions are polar opposites: endurance racing in the Arctic conditions, operating farm-to-bottle businesses that thrive in the heat of the summer. Plus, she is a 7-time competitor, but 4-time finisher of the Arrowhead 135-mile race held in January from International Falls, Minnesota to Tower, Minnesota, where she is the first female foot division to finish unsupported. I tell you what, the accolades go on and on and on, which is great because you know what, Rachel? If you don't challenge yourself, how do you really know where your limits are or where is that red line? So first and foremost, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You bet. So what ended up getting you into, yep, you got it. What ended up shifting you into this type of racing?
Sure. My husband did a lot of running when we first got married. Wouldn't stop talking about it. So I figured if I had to listen to him talk about running all the time, I might as well try running myself. So kind of did your typical thing where I started with a 5K, worked myself up to a half marathon, got into a marathon, and just kind of kept going from there.
Now, you had mentioned before we even got on air, you're like, well, I didn't quite finish this or whatever that statement was. So then you decided to run further.
Yeah, I would say my first marathon experience was not awesome. Things did not go great. So I decided to sign up for an ultra marathon a couple weeks later because why not? Push it a little bit further and see how it went, and that actually went awesome. So been doing that ever since too.
That's great. I ran a marathon once, okay? And the only reason why I ran the marathon is my significant other's like, okay, we'll do a self-defense training seminar. If you run the marathon with me, I'm like, sure, let's do it. 5 weeks out. So the furthest that I had ever been on my feet was 12 hours, but it just goes to show that we finished, we knocked it out, but it's all about the mind. So to see and hear something different, like, oh, okay, the marathon, but you're like, yeah, I want to do something more. And how long of a time frame was it after that you ended up doing it?
It was about 4 weeks, I think, after the Fargo Marathon that I ended up doing the Lean Horse ultra marathon in South Dakota.
You look at different things and why people do challenges and why they shift. Why did you choose? And I think sometimes they choose us, our paths do. What have you always had that mindset of wanting to push towards more, or was there something that ended up flipping when you were younger, like, okay, I need to do this, where the warrior started to step out?
A lot of it for me just comes from a love of nature and just the opportunity to spend time out in the wild as much as I can, see as much of that as I can. So that pursuit towards being on the trail for a long amount of time, this gives me the opportunity to do that. So I was kind of instantly drawn towards more trail running versus road running as I got into it. And then kind of always done day and night work. So endurance is a huge part of that, to be able to work extended hours. So that fell right into that endurance mindset of being able to be on my feet for hours and hours at a time or days at a time.
So you've done 7 different arrowheads, and you said you completed 4. What different temperatures have you faced during that time frame?
Sure. So my first year at the Arrowhead 135, it actually snowed a foot during the race. And just to kind of give you a perspective, this is an event where you're required to drag your survival gear with you. The conditions are so severe that you need to be able to self-rescue. So you carry a sleeping bag, the ability to make fire, just everything to keep you warm and sustained for a minimum of a day before rescue can get to you, or you can self-rescue by getting yourself off the trail and into more of a civilized, established area it's a pretty remote area, so that can take a while. So that first year it snowed a foot, and it was about 25 to 30 degrees above zero. So that was complicated because of high humidity, very damp clothing. When you're moving, dragging weight, you're putting off a lot of sweat. So that was kind of its own danger zone. And then I was also there during the polar vortex. So that was very, very sub-zero. I think day 2 it got to 60 below that year.
Wow.
And so that's a really weird experience when you're eating food on the trail that's actually colder than your deep freeze, and food shatters at that temperature. So fabrics also get fragile. You have to worry about tearing fabrics. Zippers don't work the same way. Water freezes really quickly. Batteries freeze for headlamps, things like that. So just kind of this whole wild range from 30 above, and we've been rained on during the event, and then, crazy sub-zero of 40 below and more.
I can imagine. I just think of when we go outside briefly from our vehicles to go into our homes or into an office, and 40 below, right? This is kind of norm in North Dakota, Minnesota area. But we're not outside in it for long extended periods of time where it's like, okay, briefly, maybe a minute max. You're running to your vehicle, running in quick. How do you sustain something like that when it's that freezing for a long period of time, knowing, you sent me a great YouTube or an interview where there's 3 or 4 pit stops. So you really don't have shelter.
No, you don't. So a lot of it is focusing on your safety zones. You kind of have this mindset where, like, if you're feeling great on the trail, you want to push it. You want to make up time. You want to get this speed going. But it's this constant balance between creating speed and then not sweating. So it's training. I spend months and months and months training every winter to make sure that I'm going as fast as I can, to make sure that I'm staying within the safety zone of the amount of time I want to be out in those elements. And at the same time, making sure that I'm not sweating, because sweat will literally freeze to your body and you'll get frozen inside your clothing.
How do you train for that? So clearly, when your body is starting to sweat, but when you're keeping it in that range, I know it varies. So the temperature, clearly the clothing, so on and so forth. With your training, there's got to be different things that you're like, okay, this is a trigger point. Hey, slow it down. Or how do you balance it out, right? So you look at a marathon. People set like a cadence, right? They have a certain amount of time frame that they're going. How do you do that when it's clearly extreme weather and it's cold, so that you're balancing how much you're sweating and not?
Yep. So a lot of it's a balance of knowing what the course is. The Arrowhead is a very hilly course. And so you want to know when you're heading into a hilly section, that's actually when I'm starting to take layers off, because I know I'm going to have a higher power output. So that's going to be a higher sweat threshold that way. I also plan things on windy sections. We have like a 2-mile lake crossing in different exposed areas through marshes that tend to be heavy wind areas. So that's where I'm having to put other layers back on as wind block. In the training process, though, it starts out as always wearing less gear than it's balancing a degree of being cold versus cool. And that's a very fine line between the two. So most of my winter training season, I'm training with a pack so that I can kind of take layers off. But it's at that minimum layer of clothing where I'm not shivering. But if I were to stop, I would be.
What is the typical training duration of time? So like I know for when I was fighting, it was a 6-week fight camp, right? We're training for all these different things. Now, clearly with the 4 seasons, it changes and it alters because you're competing in January, right? Literally the frozen tundra. So how do you map that out, your training during the different seasons, knowing that you don't know what the extreme cold is going to be like? And, right now, how would you train, or do you train in the summer, or what does that look like?
Sure. That's a great question. It's a tough one in the summer because I'm hot when it starts to get to be like 40 degrees above. So already I'm just so overheated that these cooler evenings have been great. But a lot of it in the off season is always trying to maintain that marathon base or a 50K base, to where at any point, if I wanted to bust out a 50K run, then I'm capable of doing that. As we build into those early or winter months, starting kind of in October, that's when my mileage starts to climb. And a lot of it with the mileage is not just the time on your feet, but also the ability to eat over a long duration of time, because you don't do a multi-day event without having to eat constantly. It's one of the things you'll get the most bored of, and you never think it was this thing, but once you get to day 3, you're so tired of eating every hour, half hour, that you kind of get over that. So it's just trying to train the eating component, the layering component, and then the distance on top of all of it. So I kind of do a balance between, running 3 days a week and then a super long run, and then just making that long run longer and longer as we get into the fall and winter months.
What is the Arrowhead 135?
Sure. Well, as you mentioned earlier, it's a 135-mile run. It's from International Falls, starts out on a snowmobile trail and follows this same snowmobile trail all the way to a casino near Tower, Minnesota. So really beautiful section, but not like paved footing. It's not really plowed. There's groomers that go out, but you get what the snow conditions give you. So it's a lot of varied footing. We've had fast years where it's nice and frozen because it is 20 below, and we've had potato snow where it's like mashed potatoes and you're getting pushed all over. So it wreaks havoc on your ankles. And this can also be done on ski, on bike, or on foot. I love to run, so I'm on foot, and I've only ever done it on foot so far.
How many people average, when you look at those 3 different options from ski, bike, and foot, where do you see the higher ratio of individuals where they compete?
Actually on bike. So those fat tire bikes that you see a lot of, those float really well on top of snow. And it's an awful lot of fun to do the hills on those things.
So I saw images of you competing and the sled. All right, let's talk about the different things that you're actually bringing with you. We briefly spoke about some of the survival, but what is the weight that you are dragging behind you, and what does that all look like?
Sure. So just to give you a visual, if you think that the Iditarod sled dog race, I am the dog. I am the one dragging the sled. When I go supported, so that means when I'm able to go into the checkpoints, there are 3 of them throughout the course. If I'm going supported, that's going to be a 35 to 40 pound sled that I'm dragging behind me. And this is a really sophisticated sled. I never imagined as an adult I would have a $300 sled, but here I am. But it's super ultra lightweight. It's made out of the same things that lines snow plows. So it's made to be dragged that far without getting worn through. Your traditional kid sleds, those actually, you'll wear holes through them on a course like this if you do a sled like that. And then if I'm going unsupported, that's where I'm bringing everything, that all of the food for 135 miles, all of the capability to boil snow for water. So that includes all my fuel for my camp stove. Then that's going to be a 60-pound plus sled. So that's a lot of back pressure pulling me down a hill and a lot to drag over that kind of distance.
So when you're dragging the sled, is it directly around the waist, or do you have it more of a harness where it's going across the upper part of your shoulders and then your hips also?
So I'm really strong for my lower body, so I do the waist harness. A lot of people do a combination of the two where they'll pull from their shoulders or from their waist, or they'll kind of alternate as they go on. But where I'm anchored from my point of strength is from my hips, so that's where I'm pulling from.
Now, there's a lot of clearly different, the diversity, when you look at different races, whether it's runs, whether it's obstacle courses, you see a diverse crowd. So what type of demographics do you typically see for individuals who are competing in the Arrowhead?
Sure. So one of the most exciting things for me is when I first got into this, I was one of less than 10 females across all divisions doing this. So to see the female field grow from that to over 50 plus in the last couple of years has been just this amazing thing to watch. And just the skill of the women coming in is unreal. So that's been super exciting. But I think the most surprising part is the age variance. So a lot of the people that are getting those podium finishes are over the age of 45.
When you dove into the Arrowhead, right? So clearly people have to start somewhere, right? When you're looking at different age ranges, how did you find out about the Arrowhead? And then clearly not knowing much about it except for probably reading, watching videos, I'm assuming you had to reach out to try to find a mentor or a trainer, or did you just kind of like, all right, well, I'm just going to do this and go off of video?
Sure. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend going that route. It's pretty dangerous. I did have a mentor. So my friend Rick Wager is actually the one that kind of introduced me to the event. I had heard about it just through other sources, just kind of searching online and things like that to find out about this race. And then I found out that Rick, who was based in Fargo at the time, had been running it. And so at that point, there were so few ultra runners in the area that when I did the Lean Horse ultra marathon, he actually reached out to me and my running partner and was like, hey, it's good to hear of other ultra runners in the area. Can I talk to you? Can we meet up for a run? And so started running with him, and then I asked if I could actually mentorship under him to learn the ways of being safe in the cold, and did that for about 4 years before I actually did the event the first time.
What did you learn in those 4 years of training that helped you when you first went into the race?
Sure. So a lot of it is where those limits are, to know if you're getting too far outside of the safe zones in the cold where you need to dial back. So a lot of cold exposure with a buddy that way, to where you're, if you're getting yourself into a limit where you can no longer move your fingers, that you have someone there to kind of help you get gear, those sorts of things. And yeah, there's just a lot of different components in that.
Did you have fears going into it? We talk about different challenges, but, sometimes there's that hindering little piece of, okay, what if this goes wrong? What are the solutions? Some people look at the fear and they dive into it, where they latch onto it, where other individuals like, okay, there's a problem, so let's find a solution. What was your mindset like with establishing and looking at some of those fears, but then also overcoming them?
Yep. So a lot of it for me was putting myself in the position where self-rescue was my only way of finishing a run. So it was doing a point-to-point, where I would, I'd be dropped off in Hawley and I'd run to Fargo, where there is no option for me personally to call in outside aid, or at least that was the mental mindset that I set. That was a lot of, 12-hour runs where there is no outside support. There's no warm shelter to go into, to just learn what that would look like. And again, I'm doing all of this with safety gear on my person. So I'm not like, I have an Everest rated sleeping bag that's with me when I'm doing these things. I always have a down jacket with me, those sorts of things. So I'm not going completely outside of the realm of where I'm in a danger zone that isn't somewhat supported, but it's being self-reliant so that you're kind of massaging that fear and knowing how to address it. And you just learn a ton.
Well, there's a lot of different training. So you look at the fact of physical fitness. Mm-hmm. There's the physical component, there's a mental component, but then there's also the survival. So learning how to do the boiling, all of those things. So what are some of the survival methods that you had to learn prior to doing the race?
Sure. Oh, that's a tough one. I would say I was not comfortable working a stove in winter. I did backpacking and those sorts of things, but it is a completely different mindset when you're having to learn how to work something with mittens on. So, I mean, my husband and I would go camping in the fall and early winter months, and for a couple of years I actually kind of trained with mittens, even though I didn't need them, just so that I would get comfortable doing those sorts of things. At that same time, you have all of the survival gear that can light on fire. So you're working with a stove close to your equipment, and then it's also trying to figure out how to secure your gear. So it's just this kind of constant balance of what keeps you comfortable and what gets you to the next step is kind of a lot to navigate.
Oh, 100%. Because I couldn't imagine you're trying to finish, yep. You're trying to survive, you're trying to make sure that your body temperature is where it needs to be, your physical body is still moving, you're nourished, yep. You're hydrated. There's a lot of different varying factors that, this is what they said in the top 50 toughest races. Am I correct on that?
Yep, that's correct. There's been a lot more races since then, so I feel like there's harder ones than this, but this is pretty challenging, especially if you're not from a cold climate.
Well, 100%. We're going to dive into, I really want to know when we come out of a break is, how do you train seasonally? Mm-hmm. And then what does that look like? But then also too, when you're diving into the mindset, there has to be different things that you're working on, because what most people don't recognize is that there aren't any spectators. For 135 miles, you are literally in sacred silence. You're in your own thoughts, where it can be self-sabotaging. But then it's like, okay, what is my mantra? I have to go to my mantra. I have to go to that place to overcome literally the odds.
Right.
Rachel, let's talk about what that seasonal training looks like, because clearly there's a lot of preparation. And when you're looking at the peaks and the valleys, and when you're accelerating your training compared to, like you had said, maintaining a base, what does that look like, knowing that the competition is in January? So let's start from spring moving into the actual event.
Sure. So in spring, I kind of have to simulate hill training with a sled. So I actually have a weighted tire that I'll drag to try to make it kind of simulate that feel of that back pressure of a sled pulling you backwards. And so that kind of gets my hips and my quads and things like that pulled to where they need to be to kind of build up that strength. And then I start adding in more distance the closer I get to those fall months and keep building it from there.
During training, have you had any type of individuals that have approached you during training? Because sometimes people are looking, okay, she's pulling a tire, she's pulling a sled. What is going on here? Because sometimes it's like people get curious.
Yeah, I deal with a lot of curious people, and they all mean well, so it's been really great. I do a lot of training on gravel roads, so it's a lot of farmers that kind of pull over and ask what I'm up to, make sure I'm not lost. And, they see me out there with my trekking poles and my loaded backpack and want to know what's going on, so I fill them in, and hopefully it's good entertainment for them for the day. But I've also been pulled over by the State Patrol when I'm doing hill training in the clover leafs around town, just trying to get any hills that I can in a flat area. So that was a funny experience, too, to have State Patrol pull you over. They're concerned that you're trying to run on interstate, and I'm really just trying to get hills where we have that kind of depression. So, yeah.
That's awesome. You should have had the patrolman join in with you. I mean, like, hey, buddy, let's do some hills. Let's just knock this out. Then we can really have a great story to follow.
Yeah, he figured it out pretty soon when he saw all my tech gear that I was wearing, that I wasn't, getting myself into trouble, that I had a purpose. So it was a good conversation, but pretty comical.
Oh, I'm sure. With your gear, when you look at the different type of terrain that you're training on, right? So clearly you have different shoes that you're using for different seasons. What does that look like when you're actually competing in the race? Do you have tracks on your shoes, or like what is it all entail?
So a lot of it is trying to keep your toes from freezing. So I'm actually wearing shoes that are close to 2 sizes bigger than they need to be. That means that I'll be putting multiple layers of wool socks in. I'll have shearling liners that I add to my shoes. Most running shoes are going to have a mesh so that they're breathable. That's something that I have to try to avoid, because anything that lets air out can also let snow in. So it's that trying to trap as much heat in as you can, but needing a certain degree of breathability, because you're still working, your feet are still sweating, and sweat, like I said earlier, it's a freezing issue. And so it's trying to keep as dry as possible. So it's a mix of Gore-Tex and natural things like your wool and leather.
Awesome. So coming into the fall, you're talking about doing hills, so on and so forth. When you start prepping and building, right? So you're coming out of that foundation, and now you're really literally in the fight.
Yep.
What does your training look like for hours per day? And then how does it shift so that you're not overtraining or, overcompensating in certain areas to reduce injury?
Sure. So since the run goes continuously, so I've got 60 hours to complete 135 miles, is trying to train different hours of the day at the same time I'm training distance. So I'll get up to a 12, 14-hour run in a single shot. And I'm trying to build in when I feel I'm going to feel the weakest or most tired. So a lot of that is when I get done with my day job, I'm getting all of my gear together, and I'm heading out the door right then to run through the night and into a morning, because that's, trying to train my body what it is to, when you want to wind down, when your body's used to going to bed at 10:30 at night, to push through that, what your default is and how your body tries to wind down for a night, to continue to push through a night and then wake with the sunrise when you're on the go.
How do you balance your training with your job and your businesses? Because you're talking about, hey, I'm working a full-time job.
Yep.
Plus you're training and you're trying to get X amount of hours in. Where do you sleep? I mean, it doesn't sound like you're getting a lot of sleep sometimes during that training.
No, I don't. It's literally trying to fit in runs whenever I can. Sometimes that's commuting on foot so that I'm at least getting a run in before and after work before I start my next job. I have the benefit of the businesses that I own. Everything I do is heavy, whether it's hundreds of pounds of sugar or hundreds of pounds of peppers. So it's everything I lift is also adding to my strength base. And the part with endurance that I don't think a lot of people understand is it's not just cardio. There's a tremendous amount of strength needed to do these sorts of things, because as your body goes further and further, you need every muscle to try to keep you upright. It's why you see some people that get to an end of a marathon and they're kind of hunched over because their core is kind of given up because they haven't built up that strength everywhere. And so it's always interesting for me because the most sore thing at the end of these races is actually my arms, from using my trekking poles to pull me up and over these hills again and again and again.
When you're training and then when you're actually in the race itself, what is the average caloric intake that you're taking during the race?
If I'm lucky enough to feel like I can eat the whole time, I'm shooting for like 100 calories every half hour. And then I build in at those checkpoints where I'm trying to eat a meal that's between 500 and 700 calories. Now, you'll go through periods where you just can't eat because your body's so over it. And when you've been up for days like that, fatigue also creates a certain degree of nausea. So some of it is you just try to shove it in while you can, and other times you just can't.
So when you have the checkpoints, like I said, the interview that I was watching of you, you had said that you had stopped at the first checkpoint. You sat there for about an hour to make sure that replenish, change socks, get moving, and then the next one you slept a little bit. During those checkpoints, how much time are you actually taking as downtime or recovery rest in the, the potential 60 hours to complete the race?
Honestly, I would say none.
Okay.
Because it's such a mental game at that point. So there's this saying in ultra running that's beware of the chair, because most people that sit down during an ultra marathon have a really tough time getting up and getting going. So you're constantly you're in a place of a little bit more comfort than where you've been. It'd be so easy to quit there. Mm-hmm. And so it's this constant mental game of working that checklist of what chores haven't I done? Have I powdered my socks? Have I changed my socks? Have I added new water to all of my thermoses? Do I have enough electrolytes in those? How have I been doing for my protein intake? Is my salt intake high enough? What do I need to eat while I'm here to keep doing that? And then is this a point where I need to grab 15 minutes of shut-eye so that I can try to get an extra 4 hours out of this break? Or is that going to make me too tired, where I'm better off skipping it and maybe I need to eat some caffeine here?
Okay.
So it's not as restful as you would think. I would say that the biggest benefit of those checkpoints is actually the camaraderie with who you're sharing the trail with, because we do have a tough time. We get distance from one another and we have a tough time talking.
Are you ever close by somebody when you're in the race? So, do you communicate when you're by them, or are you more so focused on, okay, I just have a warm body next to me. This is my motivation to keep stepping forward, because I know sometimes you don't want to take energy from what you're doing, plus you're losing heat as you're speaking. So what does that look like if somebody is side by side with you? Is there camaraderie, or is it like, okay, we're honed in, we're focused, I'm feeding off of you, you're feeding off of me?
Sure. It varies. It all depends on what distance you're at in the race and how quickly you're moving that year, plus the elements. So you'll have, I would say in the beginning, 50K of the race, we're much closer together. Everybody's kind of sharing that same base energy with one another. Your speedy people are trying not to use their speed too early, and your average runners or bikers or skiers are all kind of staying within that, they're saving that energy for further down the course. As we get into the night, that's when things get a little bit more conversational, especially those beginning hours of the night where we're all trying to check in with one another. It's trying to keep each other safe, trying to keep each other awake. And then you eventually get to the phase where we're all kind of pushing this almost sleep deprivation hallucination stage. And that's where it's all just following that cone of light from your headlamp. And then depending on the conditions, we kind of do the geese thing where someone takes the lead and there's a line of people behind him. And then as that lead goose gets tired, someone else takes the lead and we kind of cycle through. And that's if you're with someone. I've had whole years where, like the year I went unsupported just because of how I was doing things with the cadence of having to boil snow for water, I spent a lot of that course alone just because of my timing was so far off of everybody else, because I did have to melt snow for water.
In those moments of being alone,
Mm-hmm.
What did you learn most about yourself? So again, you've competed in 7 and finished 4.
Sure.
So there's moments that can feel self-defeating, but then there's also moments of like, man, I did this and I know I can do more. What did you learn in those moments of silence, or what came to you during those time frames?
Sure. when people ask me about ultra marathoning, I try to tell them that you need to believe in yourself more than anybody else. And I would say that in those moments of being by myself, that is very much the way that it was. That just to trust your capabilities, to trust your training, was a huge asset for me in those moments. But I do train a lot of that solitude, so it doesn't freak me out.
What do you say to yourself? I'm curious, right? So I know like my mantra is define the fight. When I was doing the Crucible, it's like, okay, Mariah, you're halfway through. I'm watching the sun freezing, right? I'm like, all right, why are like defining your why? Like, what is your why? And it's like, I'm here to define that fight. What is it for me? And why am I doing this? So for you, what does that look like for you?
Sure. So I do sacrifice an awful lot in time and resources in order to be there. So a lot of it is just remembering what I've done in the lead up to it, what got me to this point, and to just kind of use all of those hard moments to just kind of keep pushing me further and further down the course.
How is it for your husband knowing that you're training hours upon hours? What does that sacrifice within your guys' marriage of time and training?
Sure. So I'm very lucky. He's been really great about chasing me down many trails. You can really only meet up with me on certain checkpoints of the event and things like this. So it's always great to see his face. But he'll spend, 12, 14 hours without seeing me at all, just wondering where I'm at and how it's going. But it is a huge, it's one of those that I would love to be able to spend a weekend at home with my husband for the whole time and just hang out and be lazy on the couch. But it's usually, hey, I'm going to go running. And the longer we've been married, he's learned to ask, when I say I'm going to go running, he has to ask me how long. Because I've had runs where I've told him I'm going to go running and I didn't get home till midnight or 1 a.m.
Well, which can be a scary thing.
Yeah.
Especially in current days and times when you're running, through the night into the early morning. I think it's great that you have such an amazing support system. I met your husband at the Ronia Berry Festival, not knowing that, okay, our worlds were going to collide.
Yep.
But unbelievable drinks that you guys have too with Flannel Fizz. So I'm going to have you break those down. So let's talk about the hot sauces and then we're going to talk about the soda.
Sure. So our hot sauce business is Off the Deck Hot Sauce. And we've been going since 2016. That was kind of this happenstance thing where my husband was a nerd reading about fermentation, tried making some hot sauce. It was so good that I was like, we need to sell this. So I had a whole bunch of people try it. They agreed. 6 weeks later, we started a business, and here we are 8 years later.
Awesome.
So yeah, and we do have those 2 national awards. So we're second place for all natural hot sauces and third place for habanero hot sauces for the Scovie Awards, which is one of the biggest hot sauce competitions in the country.
Holy smokes.
Yeah,
like
exciting.
Literally smokes.
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems crazy for a hot sauce company in North Dakota.
Right.
But we're pretty proud of that. And everything we do is farm to bottle. So all of my peppers are grown locally. So once harvest hits, it's an endurance feat.
So are you guys growing your own peppers or are you going directly to somebody local to get the peppers?
Yeah, so we started growing the peppers on our deck. Business got bigger, deck didn't. So that's why our name is Off the Deck. So we range from anywhere from 3 to 5 farmers per season that we contract to grow for us. This year we've got 4.
So when you're looking at your distribution, like how many bottles or what does that production look like for you?
Yep, so we're scaling every year. Part of that scaling means also scaling the acreage that we have. And a certain degree of that scaling is also dependent on the weather that we have. So just like the endurance racing, like our businesses have that component of you don't know what it's going to look like from season to season,
right.
And you work with what, the seasons give you.
100%. So with the Flannel Fizz, talk about the Flannel Fizz and how individuals can learn about that, because I'm all about ingredients and I love the fact that you're talking about your hot sauce is natural.
Right.
Key.
Yep.
Key 100%. So what is Flannel Fizz? What's all in it? And then kind of break that down for us.
Sure. So we started out Flannel Fizz thinking that would be our winter project when we weren't busy with hot sauce. Now we're just busy with both all the time and busy with running. But with the soda end of things, what we wanted to do is we wanted to make beverages with real sugar, real flavors. So we use whole fruit, whole herbs to make our sodas. We're really proud. All of our rhubarb soda is made with locally harvested rhubarb. So I'm already 500 pounds into the rhubarb harvest this year. And that's everything that we process ourselves. So it's very much seeing it from the beginning phase of that field right into the bottle.
Well, and looking at all the different foods and how they've shifted and what individuals are consuming,
Right.
it's nice to know that when you are making your own, you know exactly what's going into it. So, if individuals are drinking soda, right, like pop,
Right.
you're looking at Coke, you're looking at Pepsi, Mountain Dew, whatever that may or may not be, this would also be a great substitute then to start shifting
Yep.
towards something that is healthier and has better ingredients for you.
Exactly. Yeah, you can understand every flavor that's on our ingredient label because it's real food.
Yeah, it was like rhubarb. I think, what are some of the flavors that you guys have?
Yeah, so we've got a lemon lime rosemary soda. That's one of my favorites. We've got a Marionberry soda. So my husband used to live in Oregon. His family still lives there. And so we go out to Oregon every year and get Marionberries, which are like a blackberry, to make that soda. We've got a raspberry mint soda, a couple others.
It's amazing. And I don't drink pop, right? So then when I came across your guys' stand, I'm like, yes, finally something with a little carbonation that, like you said, you can read the ingredients. You know exactly what you're putting into your body because it's far and few between.
Right.
So with businesses, Rachel, you've got Off the Deck. You guys have Flannel Fizz. You have the Arrowhead 135. I'm not going to call that a business, but it also requires a lot of your time on top of working full time. How do you keep afloat?
Sure.
Mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally?
I would say passion. I would say that I'm one of those lucky people that gets to pursue what they're passionate about. So whether that's my day job, whether it's the businesses I own, or the running that I do, that I'm just able to chase life on all fronts. And that's just amazing.
I love it.
Yeah.
So what's next?
Really want to take it further, honestly. So I've done the 135-mile race. There's some other races coming out that are 350 miles, 1,000 miles. So it's just a matter of working myself towards that next thing. But it's a big learning curve between those. So
I love the fact that you have passion and that you are really trying to test yourself to see, hey, I don't want to leave anything behind. I want to make sure that I'm putting everything out there and I'm testing myself because, you know what, at the end of the day, we're only here once. Right? So there are multiple races. So if you're an individual who has never done a race, start with a 5K.
Right.
Start with a mud run. Start with whatever that looks like in your world and recognize that we all have to start somewhere, right? It's like we're speaking about the different demographics. It's the average Joe who is like, hey, I want to do this. And they're just taking those steps towards the training to make sure that they're doing it right and safely is really what it comes down to. So what type of motivation for those individuals that are like, oh, yes, I want to try something. I'm excited. Man, she knocked it out. What is that motivation that you would want to leave to somebody to help spark that fire?
Sure. So I would say, like, you don't have to be physically gifted to be able to do this. If you decide in your mind that you can do this, you can do this. I agree with you that start out with kind of building that base. I started out with a 5K and built up to 10K, half marathon, and just kept going from there and celebrate every single one of those milestones. I remember when I did my first 5K, I went to a breakfast joint afterward and ate my body weight in food because I thought I had done just this incredible thing, which for me at that point, that was incredible. That was the furthest I'd ever gone. And so, like, don't look at those other people that are doing these distances beyond you and think, well, I just did a 5K. It's still a big deal.
And that's where the term comparison kills comes into play.
Yeah.
Compare yourself to yourself. Really, at the end of the day, that's really what it's all about is like, okay, what did you just accomplish? So it's debriefing. Where did I do well and where can I do better? And what is next? So push your limits, test yourself, because at the end of the day, you don't want to look back and say, what if? Right. So Rachel, I want to thank you so much for coming on Define the Fight today, for sharing your passion, sharing your knowledge on a challenge that I have never even heard of until reading and looking. And, you know, my friend, thankfully, thank you, Jen, for the introduction. But that's what life is all about, is where can you connect different circles and grow in life. So thank you so much for sharing your story.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. If you guys are, looking for more on how to define the fight, or if you are looking to see how you can help children, check out our nonprofit, definethefight.org, where our goal is to make sure that we're leading children to empower themselves from within. We'll see you next week.